The quiet panic. You guys have been asking me to cover this topic for months now, and I finally found the perfect story to dive into it. This is something that happens way more often than you think, but most people never hear about it because of how quietly these situations get handled. It was supposed to be just another ordinary Tuesday at the recording studio. Sarah had been working as a sound engineer for about 3 years, and she thought she'd seen everything. The studio was one of those high-end places where famous musicians would come to lay down tracks. But that day it was just a small indie band trying to finish their debut album. They'd been working on this one song for weeks, constantly tweaking the arrangement, obsessing over every little detail. The band had this weird ritual where they'd always leave the last measure of every song completely empty during the initial recording sessions. They called it their signature move, something about building anticipation or letting the music breathe. Sarah thought it was pretentious, but hey, artists have their quirks, right? She'd learned not to question these creative decisions after working with so many different personalities. But this particular Tuesday, something felt different from the moment she walked into the control room. The atmosphere was tense, almost electric. The band members were whispering among themselves, constantly glancing at the clock, checking their phones. Sarah figured they were just stressed about their deadline. But as the hours passed, their behavior became increasingly strange. Around 2 in the afternoon, right after lunch, the lead guitarist approached Sarah with an unusual request. He wanted her to step away from the mixing board for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. No explanation, just a specific time frame. When she asked why, he got defensive and said it was part of their creative process. Sarah had dealt with demanding artists before, but this felt different. There was something desperate in his voice, something that made her skin crawl. She reluctantly agreed and stepped into the hallway. But curiosity got the better of her. Through the small window in the door, she watched as the band huddled around something she couldn't quite see. They were moving frantically, almost frantically, like they were trying to hide evidence or plant something. The whole scene lasted exactly as long as the guitarist had specified. When Sarah returned to the control room, everything appeared normal on the surface, but she noticed subtle changes. The microphone positions had been adjusted slightly. There was a new cable running behind the drum kit that wasn't there before. And most unsettling of all, there was now a small device attached to the underside of the mixing console that definitely hadn't been there when she left. The band acted like nothing had happened, but their energy had completely shifted. They were no longer the nervous perfectionist musician she'd been working with all morning. Now they seemed confident, almost smug, like they'd accomplished something important. They finished recording that final song in record time, barely doing any takes, which was completely opposite to their usual meticulous approach. As they were packing up their equipment, Sarah overheard a conversation between the drummer and the bassist that made her blood run cold. They were talking about how nobody would ever figure it out, how the last measure would remain blank forever, and how their plan had worked perfectly. The way they said it with such satisfaction and finality made Sarah realize this wasn't about music at all. She waited until the band left before investigating that mysterious device under the mixing console. It looked like some kind of recording equipment, but more sophisticated than anything she'd ever seen in a studio. There were tiny LED lights blinking in patterns, and when she touched it, the surface was warm, like it had been actively running. Sarah had worked with every piece of recording technology imaginable, but this was something completely foreign. That's when she noticed the timestamp display on the device. It was counting down, not up. Whatever this thing was programmed to do, it was going to happen at a specific time. The countdown showed less than 6 hours remaining. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she realized she might be looking at some kind of timer, but for what? She tried to remove the device, but it was attached with some kind of industrial adhesive that wouldn't budge. Every attempt to disconnect it triggered a loud beeping sound that echoed throughout the empty studio. Sarah was starting to panic, but she forced herself to think logically. She pulled out her phone and started documenting everything, taking photos from every angle, recording videos of the blinking lights and the countdown timer. The smart thing would have been to call the police immediately, but Sarah had no idea what she'd even tell them. A band left a mysterious device in a recording studio? It could have been anything. Maybe it was just some experimental recording equipment she wasn't familiar with. Maybe she was overreacting to what was probably just eccentric artist behavior. But deep down, Sarah knew something was seriously wrong. The way the band members had acted, the secretive conversation she'd overheard, the precision of their timing, none of it added up to innocent creative expression. This felt calculated, planned, dangerous. She decided to call her supervisor, but when she reached for the studio's landline, she discovered the phone lines had been cut. Not just disconnected or unplugged, but physically severed with what looked like wire cutters. The cell phone reception in the basement studio had always been spotty, but now she couldn't get any signal at all. It was like someone had deliberately isolated the building from all outside communication. Sarah felt trapped, but she wasn't about to sit there and wait to find out what would happen when that countdown reached 0. She grabbed her keys and headed for the exit, but the main door wouldn't open. The electronic lock system had been overridden somehow, and the manual override wasn't responding. She tried every exit she could think of, but they were all sealed tight. The countdown timer now showed less than 4 hours remaining, and those blinking LED lights were pulsing faster, more urgently. Sarah realized she was going to have to figure this out on her own in this soundproof basement studio with whatever that device was programmed to do getting closer by the minute. She started thinking about everything the band had said and done throughout the day, looking for clues she might have missed. They'd mentioned leaving the last measure blank, but now Sarah wondered if that phrase meant something completely different than she'd assumed. What if it wasn't about music at all? What if it was some kind of code? The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that this whole recording session had been an elaborate setup. The band had never been interested in making music. They'd used the studio as cover for something much more sinister. And now Sarah was stuck in the middle of whatever they'd planned. With less than 3 hours left on the countdown, Sarah knew she had to make a choice. She could keep trying to escape, Or she could try to understand what this device was designed to do and maybe find a way to stop it. Either way, time was running out, and whatever was supposed to happen when that timer reached 0 was getting closer with every passing second. The empty studio felt different now, charged with tension and possibility. Sarah had always prided herself on staying calm under pressure, but this was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. She was about to discover that some secrets are hidden in plain sight, and sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is leave the last measure blank. Sarah stared at the device, her mind racing through every possibility. The countdown now showed 2 hours and 43 minutes. She'd worked in this studio long enough to know every piece of equipment, every wire, every connection. This thing was definitely not supposed to be here. She decided to approach this systematically. If the band had planned this whole thing, there had to be clues somewhere. Sarah started searching through the trash, looking for anything they might have left behind. In the bottom of the wastebasket, she found a crumpled piece of paper with what looked like a floor plan of the building. Red X marks were drawn in specific locations throughout the structure, including one right where she was standing. The paper also had a series of numbers written in the margin that didn't make sense at first. But when Sarah looked at them more carefully, she realized they matched the blinking pattern of the LED lights on the device. It wasn't random at all. The lights were communicating with something, sending signals in a predetermined sequence. With just over 2 hours left, Sarah felt the weight of the situation crashing down on her. She wasn't just trapped in a recording studio anymore. She was sitting on top of what could be a bomb, or worse, some kind of surveillance device that was recording everything happening in the building. The thought made her stomach turn. She remembered the band's conversation about how nobody would ever figure it out. That suggested other people were supposed to be in the building when whatever was going to happen actually happened. Sarah checked the studio's booking calendar on the computer and felt her blood run cold. There was a children's music class scheduled to start in the upstairs rehearsal room in exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes. 23 kids aged 6 to 10 were supposed to be in this building when that countdown reached 0. Sarah's hands started shaking as she realized the true scope of what she'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about innocent children who had no idea they were walking into a trap. She tried the exits again, throwing her full body weight against the doors, but they wouldn't budge. The electronic systems had been completely overridden, and whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah was starting to panic, but she forced herself to focus. There had to be another way out, or at least a way to warn people. The device under the mixing console was getting warmer, and the LED lights were blinking faster now. Sarah could hear a faint humming sound coming from inside it, like machinery warming up for operation. Whatever this thing was designed to do, it was getting ready to activate. She started examining every inch of the device, looking for any kind of access panel or way to disable it. The surface was completely smooth except for one small seam near the bottom. Sarah grabbed a letter opener from the desk and carefully pried at the seam. It opened to reveal a complex circuit board with dozens of tiny components she didn't recognize. One wire stood out from the others. It was thicker, newer looking, and connected to what appeared to be the main power source. Sarah hesitated for a moment, knowing that cutting the wrong wire could trigger the device immediately. But with less than 90 minutes left and a classroom full of children headed this way, she didn't have much choice. She took a deep breath and cut the wire. Nothing happened. The countdown continued, the lights kept blinking, and the humming sound actually got louder. Sarah had made things worse, and now she was completely out of ideas. The panic was setting in for real, making it hard to think clearly about her next move. That's when she remembered something the band had said earlier about their signature move of leaving the last measure blank. What if that wasn't just about music? What if it was literally about leaving something unfinished, incomplete? Until the very last moment, Sarah looked at the countdown timer again, 1 hour and 12 minutes remaining. She realized that maybe the device wasn't designed to activate when the timer reached 0. Maybe it was designed to wait for someone to complete the sequence, to fill in that blank last measure with the final piece of the puzzle. She thought about the floor plan she'd found in the trash, with all those red X marks throughout the building. What if there were other devices, other timers, all waiting for a coordinated signal? The band hadn't just planted one device. They'd set up an entire network, and this was just one piece of a much larger operation. The children's music class was supposed to start in 58 minutes. Sarah had to find a way to warn them, to get them away from this building before whatever was supposed to happen actually happened. But she was still trapped, still cut off from any way to communicate with the outside world. She started searching the studio more frantically, looking for anything that could help her contact someone. In a storage closet, she found an old emergency radio that the studio kept for power outages. Sarah turned it on, hoping to at least broadcast a warning, but all she got was static. 43 minutes left on the countdown. Sarah was running out of time and options. She could hear footsteps upstairs, which meant people were already starting to arrive for evening activities. The building was filling up with innocent people who had no idea what they were walking into. In desperation, Sarah grabbed the fire axe from the emergency case and started attacking the door with everything she had. The wood splintered, but the reinforced frame held firm. She was making noise, though, and maybe someone upstairs would hear her and investigate. 27 minutes left. The LED lights on the device were now pulsing so fast they looked almost solid. The humming had turned into a high-pitched whine that made Sarah's teeth ache. Whatever this thing was building up to, it was almost ready. She could hear children's voices now, laughing and talking as they headed up to their music class. Sarah screamed as loud as she could, hoping someone would hear her through the soundproofing, but she knew it was probably useless. The studio had been designed to keep sound in, not let it out. 15 minutes left. Sarah sat down next to the device and started thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The band's strange behavior, their obsession with that empty last measure, the precision of their timing. They'd planned this perfectly, except for one thing they couldn't have anticipated. Sarah wasn't going to give up. She wasn't going to let whatever they'd planned happen to those kids upstairs. With 11 minutes left on the countdown, she made a decision that would either save everyone in the building or get her killed trying. She grabbed the device with both hands and started pulling with everything she had, ignoring the burning pain as the adhesive tore at her skin. If she couldn't disable it, maybe she could at least move it away from whatever target it was aimed at. The device came free with a sickening, ripping sound, but it was still active, still counting down. 9 minutes left. Sarah ran toward the stairs, carrying the device as far away from the children as she could get it. She made it to the far end of the basement before the timer finally reached 0. What happened next changed everything Sarah thought she knew about that day, and why some measures should never be left blank.